a bidding. 에너지 들어가 있어요.
우와! 맛봐도 돼요?
네.
와우. 와, 색깔이 조금 노란색이에요. 부드러워요. You see? Beautiful little octopus shape. Yes. Perfect. 네. 싹.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday. Arirang.
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump has claimed that Iran has informed Washington it's in a state of collapse. This comes amid reports that the U.S. leader is dissatisfied with Iran's latest proposal, stalling peace talks. The United Arab Emirates says it will exit from OPEC on May 1st, after almost 60 years, potentially weakening the group's control over global oil supplies and widening a rift between the UAE and its neighbor Saudi Arabia. Global oil prices climbed above $100 a barrel, and U.S. gas prices also rose to their highest level in around 4 years. An appellate ruling is expected this afternoon for former South Korean President Yoon, who was sentenced to 5 years in prison by a lower court for obstructing official duties. This comes a day after an appeals court increased the sentence for his wife, Kim Keon Hee, to 4 years in prison on corruption charges. U.S. President Donald Trump claimed that Iran has told Washington it's in a state of collapse. This comes as tensions remain high over the Strait of Hormuz and stalled negotiations. Our Cho Young-eun starts us off.
In a post on Truth Social on Tuesday, U.S. President Donald Trump wrote that Iran had just informed us that they are in a state of collapse. He added that Tehran wants Washington to reopen the strategic waterway as soon as possible while they try to figure out their leadership situation. Trump did not explain how the message was delivered or who conveyed it, and Iranian officials have yet to publicly respond. His remarks come amid reports that he is dissatisfied with Iran's latest proposal on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. According to reports, Tehran has offered to reopen the key shipping route if Washington lifts its blockade on Iranian ports, while leaving nuclear-related issues off the table. The U.S. has maintained pressure on Iran since April 13, when Washington imposed sweeping restrictions on Iranian vessels navigating the key shipping route. Meanwhile, President Trump's approval rating has fallen to its lowest level since returning to office. A Reuters and Ipsos poll completed on Monday showed Trump's approval rating at 34%, down from 36% in the previous survey conducted a week earlier. The figure marks a decline from January 2025, when 47% of Americans approve of his performance at the start of his second term. According to Reuters, Americans are increasingly dissatisfied with Trump's handling of rising living costs in the conflict with Iran. Only 22% of respondents approve of Trump's handling of the cost of living. The pressure on households from rising prices is fueling concerns among Republicans that they could lose control of the U.S. Congress in November's midterms. 조영은, Arirang News.
The United Arab Emirates will leave OPEC in May after nearly 6 decades. Analysts say that while the announcement will not have an immediate impact on global energy supply, it could help lower oil prices after the war if the country increases its production capacity. This comes as global oil prices continue to climb, rising above $100 a barrel. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The United Arab Emirates has announced it will leave the OPEC and OPEC Plus groups on May 1st, ending nearly 60 years of membership in one of the world's most influential oil alliances. UAE officials say the move is aimed at supporting the country's long-term strategy to meet rising global energy demand following significant investments to expand its oil production capacity. The decision signals a shift in priorities as the country looks to operate more independently in the global energy market. The departure of the UAE, a key and long-standing member, could disrupt the balance within OPEC. The group has historically worked to present a unified front despite internal disagreements over geopolitical tensions and production quotas. Analysts say the exit may weaken cohesion within the cartel and raise questions about future coordination among major oil producers. UAE Energy Minister Suhail Mohammed Al-Mazrouei said the decision followed a thorough review of the country's energy strategy. He also confirmed that the UAE did not consult with other member states, including heavyweight producer Saudi Arabia, before making the announcement. Markets reacted quickly with oil prices surging. Overnight Brent crude, the global benchmark, rose 2.5% to just over $104 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate climbed nearly 4% to around $100 a barrel. U.S. gas prices have also climbed to their highest level in 4 years, averaging $4.18 per gallon, as stalled peace talks involving the United States, Israel, and Iran continue to weigh on global energy markets. The last time prices topped this level was April 2022, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and current prices are now about $1 higher than a year ago. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And now for more on the stalled peace talks between the United States and Iran and what could come next. We're joined today by Andrew Millard, Head of Department at the Department of International Relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thank you so much for coming on today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me again.
So the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner has been making headlines this week. And although President Donald Trump did say the incident won't deter him from winning the war with Iran, could it still affect negotiations with Iran?
This is unlikely to have a significant impact on the negotiations with Tehran, mainly for the reason this is not an isolated incident. So, of course, the shooting at the Correspondents' Dinner is the most recent one, but there's been several different sort of attempts against Donald Trump. So the most famous one where he was shot in the ear. So this sort of signifies that this was not an incident that is specifically directed at the Iran war policy itself. This shows that we have a lot of unrest, a lot of people angry, not about the Iran war, but just about the Trump administration in general. So all of the various policies that President Trump, that the administration has introduced over the past year, these are now sort of compounding on each other, and the Iran war is sort of adding to that, but it's not been a direct cause of the shooting. And even the shooter, if you read his manifesto, it wasn't specifically looking at the Iran war either. Now, where Tehran could possibly take advantage of this situation is it shows that there is this growing pressure, there is this growing unrest in America against the Trump administration. So in the negotiations that are ongoing between Tehran and Washington, Tehran could use this as sort of delaying tactics. They know that there's a lot of domestic pressure in the US. So if basically they just delay the negotiations, make them as long as possible, draw them out, then this will work in Tehran's favor.
Right, and Iran has also reportedly offered to reopen the Strait of Hormuz if the U.S. lifts its blockade. But despite this new proposal, the talks remain stalled. In the United States, the U.S. Secretary of State says preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon remains the core issue. So will the two sides be able to reach a deal?
So what we have now is basically a stalemate. We have Iran has its position where it doesn't want to give up on what is left of its nuclear sort of ambitions, its fuel enrichment processes and things like that. But we have the US saying they must give up their nuclear ambitions. That is the first step. Once they give up those, then they can reopen the Straits of Hormuz. So we're at very opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, if you listen to statements coming out of Tehran, they're saying that actually, apart from the nuclear issue, generally the negotiations, they are making progress, but it is this nuclear issue that is the sort of the key one. But of course, as we just mentioned, in the US, there's a lot of domestic pressure. So there is pressure in the US, but also in Tehran. Tehran economically, so whether Donald Trump's statement that he put out on Truth Social this morning was completely true, we're not sure about that. But what is true is that Iran is starting to suffer economically. They're also seeing increased domestic pressure. So I think once we can get over that last issue of the nuclear ambitions and the Straits of Hormuz, then I think a deal can be reached. However, right now, that remains the key stumbling block.
Right, and while that's happening, Iran appears to be moving closer to Russia. President Putin met with Iran's top diplomat this week and pledged deeper ties. So what's behind this move?
So, yes, Iran and Russia, they are becoming closer because of what is happening in Iran at the moment. However, again, this shouldn't be seen as something surprising. It shouldn't be seen as something unexpected and out of the blue. If we actually go back to January 2025, then this was when Iran and Russia signed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty. So this was before this war was happening. This was also before the conflicts between Israel and Iran were happening. So the Iran-Russia relationship in itself, it's not a new one. Over the past several years, they have been coming closer together. So in fact, the comprehensive treaty that they signed in January, this was covering fairly different areas from energy to defense, trade, security. So it was covering a wide area. But of course, because of the conflicts, so Ukraine and Russia conflict, and now the Iran-US conflict, here we're seeing lots more cooperation in terms of trade, in terms of energy cooperation, but more importantly, on intelligence sharing and weapons sharing, and so on.
I see. And Professor Miller, before I let you go, also in the United States, Britain's King Charles is on a 4-day visit amid differences between the two nations over the war with Iran. Why is his state visit so significant, and could it restore relations between the United Kingdom and the United States?
I mean, yes, this is quite a significant visit in that it's, to be honest, more symbolic because really this is to celebrate the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence. But it does come at a very intense time where relations between the US and UK are really at an all-time low. And so King Charles, he's not going there on an official diplomatic visit because remember, the UK royal family, they should remain apolitical. However, he is going there basically to show the long history of US-UK relations and to remind the US that there have been different disagreements in the past, but we've always managed to overcome those disagreements and we've always managed to maintain this very strong, very good relationship. So that's really the King's key message. So in his speech to Congress, he was quite humorous. He was using humor to sort of try to bring this tension down a bit. So that's really the big role that he can play. But we should remember, he is not a political official. He's more there as a symbolic representative of the UK-US relations. And we should also mention Donald Trump. He has a bit of a soft spot for the royal family. So I think this is a very good visit, a key timing.
I see. All right, Professor Miller, thank you so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
An appeals court ruling is set to be delivered on Wednesday in the case against former President Yoon, who faces charges including obstruction of official duties and abuse of power. In the first trial, Yoon was found partially guilty of blocking the execution of an arrest warrant by the Corruption Investigation Office and for procedural violations tied to his declaration of emergency martial law. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The appellate court will decide whether to uphold that verdict or hand down a different judgment. The sentencing hearing will take place at 3 p.m. at the Seoul High Court, with the ruling being live-streamed. And an appeals court order on Tuesday increased the sentence for Korea's former First Lady Kim Keon Hee from 20 months to 4 years in prison, following her guilty verdict on charges of corruption. The Seoul High Court overturned parts of the lower court ruling, finding her guilty of involvement in a stock price manipulation scheme and accepting illicit luxury gifts linked to the Unification Church. The court said Kim provided accounts and funds used in manipulating stock prices and recognized all charges related to gift-taking as bribery involving implicit solicitation. However, she was acquitted of allegations related to receiving free opinion polls from broker Myung-tae-gyun, the same as the lower court. Kim's legal team says it will appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court. President Lee Jae-myung is pushing to broaden Korea's diplomatic reach beyond its traditional partners. At a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the president emphasized deeper engagement with the Global South. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
President Lee Jae-myung has stressed the need to broaden South Korea's diplomatic outreach to the Global South following his recent trip to India and Vietnam.
변화의 물결 속에서 안정적 성장 동력을 확보하려면 특정 지역에 대한 지나친 의존도를 낮추고 우리의 선택지를 꾸준히 늘려가는 전략적이고 유연한 국익 실용 외교가 절실합니다.
Chairing his first cabinet meeting since the trip on Tuesday, President Lee said the war in the Middle East is reshaping the global economic and security landscape and called for a more strategic and flexible diplomatic approach. Tuesday's meeting reviewed the outcomes of Lee's state visits with a particular focus on strengthening economic ties with India.
어쨌든 미국, 유럽, 중국에 편중되어 있는 게 현실인데 인도는 지금 세계에서 제일 인구도 많고 14억 6천인가 7천만이라고. 근데 이게 이제 기업들이 독자적으로 진출하기에 초기에는 부담이 사실은 있는데 이 정부 간 협력이 되게 크게 도움되잖아요.
The summit with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi resulted in an agreement to establish a ministerial-level Korea-India Industrial Cooperation Committee, along with an MOU to support cooperation between the two countries' small and medium-sized enterprises.
In the case of our ministry, one deputy director covers 5 to 6 countries, including India. Despite India's importance, our current institutional capacity remains limited. We need to strengthen our governance framework to reflect India's strategic significance.
At the same time, President Lee underscored the importance of maintaining stable ties with traditional partners. He urged resolving pending issues based on mutual respect and shared principles while building forward-looking relationships. The president didn't mention specific countries, but his remarks come after the U.S. reportedly restricted intelligence sharing with Seoul on North Korea following the unification minister's disclosure of the regime's nuclear facility in Kusong. 송유진, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung has also vowed to overcome a national crisis based on social integration and the spirit of Admiral Lee Sun-shin. He attended the 481st anniversary of the birth of the 16th century naval commander Lee Sun-shin on Tuesday in the city of Athens. In his speech, he noted uncertainties stemming from the rapidly changing international order and rising energy costs due to the Middle East war. He says society needs to overcome challenges together, just as the admiral saved the country from Japanese invasion more than 400 years ago. The president promised to achieve co-prosperity and a fair society and vowed to make the country one of the global leaders in artificial intelligence. The National Assembly's April session has come to a close after a rare bipartisan push for economic relief. And attention now is on a high-stakes constitutional vote in May and local elections in June. Our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has more.
The National Assembly's extraordinary session for April ended on Tuesday after a rare burst of bipartisan lawmaking despite weeks of intense political confrontation. Lawmakers approved a 26.2 trillion won supplementary budget aimed at easing the pressure on people from inflation and high energy prices linked to the conflict in the Middle East. The package includes direct relief payments for lower-income households, with the first round of applications and payouts already underway, alongside fuel cost support, transport discounts, and supply chain assistance. With the April session now over, attention is rapidly shifting to a major constitutional reform vote in May. National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik is urging the Conservative People Power Party to allow its lawmakers a free vote on the proposal. If passed, it would mark South Korea's first constitutional amendment since 1987. The proposed changes would formally recognize the democratic legacy of the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement, strengthen parliamentary control over martial law declarations, and add the state's responsibility for balanced regional development. To pass, the bill needs support from at least 197 of the Assembly's 295 lawmakers. Reform supporters currently have 187 signatories, meaning they need opposition backing. The People Power Party has opposed the move, citing concerns over possible future debate on presidential term limits. Supporters say the current constitution already blocks any extension of a sitting president's term. The political focus is also shifting to the June 3rd local elections now just weeks away. The DP hopes to build on recent policy momentum, while the PPP faces internal divisions over leadership and campaign strategy. Several races in cities such as Busan and Daegu are expected to test whether long-standing regional voting patterns are beginning to shift. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choo Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Britain's King Charles gave a speech at a joint session of the U.S. Congress on Tuesday, calling the alliance between the two countries, quote, one of the most consequential in human history. His address to Congress was only the second such address by a British monarch in history. King Charles also urged leaders to resist turning inward and voiced his support for NATO and Ukraine. Trump met Charles privately in the Oval Office on Tuesday, calling the meeting really good. A state dinner followed at the White House that evening. Elon Musk testified on Tuesday in his lawsuit against OpenAI. Musk told a California federal court he helped build the company as a charity and watched its leadership converted into a profit-driven enterprise worth over $850 billion. Musk is seeking $150 billion in damages and wants OpenAI returned to non-profit status. He also wants CEO Sam Altman removed. OpenAI's lawyers told jurors that Musk wanted to run the company himself and sued only after failing to gain control. The judge admonished Musk before proceedings began over social media posts attacking Altman. A verdict is expected by mid-May. In Greece, an 89-year-old man wounded at least 4 people on Tuesday after opening fire at 2 government buildings in central Athens before police arrested him over 200 kilometers away near the city of Patra. The suspect first entered a social security office and shot an employee in the leg, then opened fire at a nearby courthouse, injuring several workers. Authorities found envelopes with documents at the scene suggesting a personal grievance. U.S. pop star Taylor Swift has filed trademark applications with U.S. Patent and Trademark Office covering 2 audio recordings and a staged photograph, a move that legal experts say is designed to protect her spoken voice and likeness from AI-generated deepfakes. Current copyright law does not cover AI content that mimics a voice without copying an original recording, a gap these filings on Friday aim to close. Taylor Swift's spoken voice and image have previously appeared without consent in fake advertisements, fabricated political endorsements, and explicit AI-generated material.
After yesterday's cool and cloudy weather, milder spring conditions are returning today. Afternoon temperatures will recover to near seasonal levels, with Seoul getting up to 21 degrees Celsius this afternoon, and temperatures will continue to rise through this week. Meanwhile, dry weather advisories remain in place for most of the Chungcheongdo province and Gyeongsangdo provinces. And as dry and windy conditions continue inland, wildfire risk remains elevated. Please use caution with any open flames or outdoor heat sources. And this afternoon, the capital area and Gangwon-do province will be under sunny skies, but the rest of the country will be under lots of clouds. Again, Seoul will be getting up to 21 degrees, Daegu at 20 degrees, Gyeongju, Gwangju at 19 degrees Celsius. Sunny skies and warmer weather are in the forecast for the long weekend, so spending time outdoors will be quite comfortable. Just beware of fire risks when camping and hiking.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
Introducing Korean SMEs innovations driven by smart factory projects. A competitive edge honed by technology, growth potential, and goals for the global market. We reveal what goes on in the production line. Learn more about the changing paradigms in the secondary sector on Smart Biz Accelerators. Short but bold stories of Korean culture, K-Culture Minutes. The latest cultural phenomenon, K-Now. People behind the Korean culture scene, K-People. Episodes from movies, K-Story. And theatrical performances on K-Stage. Enjoy a new episode every day. A mini concert showcasing all the charms and creativities of talented musicians. Become one through music on I'm Live. Musicians and audiences experience the moment together through a close, boundary-free stage setup. Immerse yourself in the rhythms of a live concert unfolding right before your eyes. The hottest tunes in the world, K-pop. Listen to it now. Music and powerful performances come alive on stage. From rookies to global stars, upbeat dance numbers to smooth ballads, we cover the whole range of K-pop genres. Immerse yourself in a stage charged with music and passion.
아리랑 아라리요 아리랑 고개로 넘어간다 달려 멈추지 마라 세상 끝까지 가자 아리랑 아리랑 아라리요
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Bringing news just for you is Wednesday, April 29th here in Seoul. I'm Isujin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today to represent the Gen Z is Fabio.
Great to be here.
To have you, also Niles with us.
Hi, good morning.
Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So we're heading into the middle of the work week, and what better way to get over that midweek slump than by diving into a topic that's a little unconventional, a little
controversial, but very relatable. So it's something that might make some people not in agreement and others raise an eyebrow. After all, when it comes to love and relationships, everyone really seems to have their own rules, and sometimes it looks like people even are putting those rules into writing. So today we're going to start off by asking you, Fabio, what do you think about contracts between couples?
Well, it's quite surprising that nowadays we're seeing contracts being used more and more to define personal relationships. And I think that in any dynamic between two people, there's always room for disagreement. So it makes sense that people would want to be on the same page and have a clear agreement on the responsibilities. But the idea of having a contract, though, can sound a little bit dystopian. But I do think that we need to focus on the why. Why is this happening? And I hope we do so today, because I think there's probably a natural reason behind it, too.
Right. I think it's really interesting to see both perspectives, especially something like this. So what about you? What are your thoughts on contracts?
You know, in an ideal world, love, marriage, it's supposed to be a form of sacrifice, but without any guidelines, people are people, right? So the balance can be off more than just once in the entire marriage. So I can see why people want to write them now. But as Fabio said, it can seem a little dystopian and slightly sad in some ways, but perhaps necessary.
So in theory, love is about trust and mutual sacrifice, but in reality, without clear expectations, that balance sometimes doesn't always hold. So while putting it into a contract might feel a bit cold, for some couples, it's becoming less about romance and more about fairness and protection. And that's why we're going to talk more about this. But first, let's take a look at the screen.
Marriage, and of course, having children can completely reshape people's lives, and often it's women who feel that impact the most. That's why a growing number of couples are turning to written agreements, looking to define expectations before major life changes happen. And recently, one type of contract has been drawing particular attention: prenatal agreements. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at the childbirth contract that recently went viral in Korea and what couples should watch out for before putting something like this in writing.
Just as we saw in the video, what started as a private agreement between a couple has quickly turned into a nationwide debate. And as more details surfaced, the story began to strike a chord with many. So naturally, attention has shifted to what exactly is sparking such strong reactions from people. So for people who aren't as aware of this, of what's going on, so what's behind the recent controversy over this childbirth contract that's going viral?
So this is actually a story about a married couple in their 30s who are both working professionals, and was recently posted on an online community about the contract that you just mentioned. They had been maintaining a stable married life with dual incomes when the husband suggested planning for a child. However, the wife, who had usually been pretty hesitant about childbirth and raising a child, handed him a document a few days later, and it was titled Contract for Compensation of Career Loss Due to Pregnancy and Childbirth. And according to this contract, if the pregnancy is confirmed, the husband must pay the wife a lump sum of 50 million Korean won, which in US dollars is around 33,000 US dollars. And after childbirth, he must also transfer half of the ownership of an apartment in his name to the wife. The husband is also required to fully cover expenses for postpartum care and child assistance.
I think there's a lot to unpack with this couple. Like, is this
a lot?
What kind of relationship did they have? Do they just have a normally like a transactional relationship? Had they talked about kids before getting married or not? Like, there's so many things to. I mean, this is quite obviously a striking example, and it really highlights how detailed and high stakes these agreements really can be. It also helps explain why opinions online have also been so sharply divided. So why have childbirth contracts sparked such intense debate online, Fabio?
Well, you just mentioned it. There's a lot to unpack,
Right.
so it makes sense that the debate itself became also intense online with two clear sides this time. So on the one hand, there are those who support the husband that argue that childbirth within a marriage is a sacred act of love and that treating it as a contract or or assigning a monetary value to it really loses the whole point. It's an absurd idea. So that belief is that you cannot turn a sentimental and emotional relationship into a legal obligation, because that is not the point of love. However, on the other hand, there are also supporters for the wife who argue that at a critical point in her career, doing that sacrifice and all the physical changes can create a potential career disruption that is not beneficial, and that happens through pregnancy and childbirth. So the decision itself can become very difficult. So from this perspective, giving birth without any form of compensation that is secure could negatively affect her professional life, her financial stability, and overall the life balance that she has. So it isn't necessarily about transforming the meaning of the relationship and becoming just a legal matter, but more about setting up all of the obligations for each party in a written way.
I mean, I get where she's coming from, like you said. Like, what's so interesting about this is there's such clear two sides to it. You kind of understand where both sides are coming from. And also, like, to add on, like, for her, like, career-wise, like, she might be losing out on opportunities just because she had a child. Like, she might not get that promotion or whatever. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to discuss here. But
there's a lot of nuance, and it doesn't, like, it's very divisive when it comes to opinions, but then in reality, every single individual would have a completely different situation in the same context.
Right. So in her perspective, she might be kind of trying to reach a compromise with her husband. So what do you think is then at the core issue of this debate?
Well, I think, there's a lot of things to consider and so many different points. But if I were to choose one core issue, it would be the protection of women's lives, because we have been talking about childbirth, and childbirth is a process that directly affects a woman's life balance and her career, not to mention their bodies too, and the way that they have to change their lifestyle. So the decision is very big. So in many cases, there aren't enough benefits or protections in place, which makes that decision even more difficult. And it's honestly a fact, a very bad fact, honestly, but it's a fact that women are still disproportionately affected by pregnancy, childbirth, and childcare in especially legal and work contexts in comparison to men. And although many countries have systems that allow for parental leave, there are still clear limitations, and the responsibilities during that process, I would say, remain pretty much unbalanced.
So now you, among us, you're the only one that's actually married and also has a kid. So what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, it really is this clash between ideals, expectations, and reality, and that's bound to happen at least once or twice in a marriage. No, I'm kidding, every day. But however, I would like to play the devil's advocate on the matter. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have contracts, but I do believe that it's possible to do without one. As I always tell people when they're dating, it's not always just about feeling good or having fun. Sometimes it can be, but when you're considering marriage, in a way, just like this contract, you're thinking about what this other person can give to you. You're making this deal, understanding their point of view, their values, how you're going to pursue different paths in life. And if it matches, then you get married. But of course, people can change over the course of different times, but hopefully it's somebody that you can work out through conversations and actually come to mid-grounds and go over the bumps through conversations. Because no matter how many contracts you write, when it's violated, it's violated. The damage is done. It's quite a finite way of approaching a relationship. And I personally believe that the core that needs to be highlighted in all of this is actually something that you have beyond the contract. Do you have that or not? And that's trust. If you already have that trust existing, the contract is actually just a formality and, yes, a safety net. But if you don't, then it becomes either a document to act on someone and attack them, or sometimes a necessary protection.
I think that's an answer you can give as a married person. And I think it's so true. I think marriage is a sacrifice. Everyone says that. And I think if you take out the emotional aspect of it, you can kind of see where they're coming from. But at the same time, where does this end? Like, how practical is this really? Because people have different opinions on a lot of stuff. And so this gets to the heart of the matter, because beyond the contract itself, it reflects the real challenges many women continue to face. And for those actually navigating both career and family, this isn't just theoretical. It's also deeply personal. So now let's get a more personal perspective on this. So we asked our viewers by running a poll on the Arirang YouTube channel asking, would you consider signing a childbirth contract? And here's what the results showed. So a clear majority, 63%, said no, while 26% said they would be open to the idea, highlighting a significant gap in how people view the role of such agreements in relationships. So that split is pretty telling. While a small but notable group is open to the idea, the majority still seem uncomfortable putting something as personal as childbirth into a formal agreement, suggesting there's still a strong belief that some parts of a relationship shouldn't be reduced to terms on paper. So to get a more in-depth and personal perspective on this, we're going to be joined by a familiar face, someone well known to our viewers who has recently given birth. And that conversation is coming up right after a break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Grace, a familiar face and former regular panelist on our show, now back with us after giving birth. So hello, Grace. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hello.
Hi, guys. It's so nice to see you.
So nice to see you. So Grace, what has been, I guess, your biggest concern since giving birth?
Oh my gosh. Well, I knew that caring for a newborn would be difficult, but the reality was so much harder, especially as I was trying to get through the postpartum recovery myself. And of course, there are minor daily concerns because every day is like literally so different. There are days when the baby throws up while I'm feeding, or just cries hysterically for no reason. So little worries and concerns do cause some anxiety because I'm always wondering if I'm doing things right. And there are also bigger long-term concerns, like thinking about how I'm going to take care of him alone once the nanny's time is over in a couple weeks, or sending him to daycare once I return to work, and so on. Yeah, everything is just kind of new and scary, but I'm trying to enjoy it because the baby also brings so much joy and is a wonderful new addition to the family.
Well, first of all, congratulations, Grace. You look radiant.
Thank you.
I want to ask, how did you and your spouse agree on dividing responsibilities after childbirth?
Honestly, we didn't really have a detailed conversation about the roles and responsibilities of each person. I think we just kind of take it one day at a time and we play it by ear, and each of us do what we can in the moment. So if I'm feeding the baby and I'm changing diapers, my husband will do the dishes, do the laundry, prep meals for us, and so on. And one thing that we actually naturally came to an agreement about was that I'd be responsible for the feedings throughout the night, since my husband is still working regular hours during the week, and I'm on maternity leave. So that just made most sense. And another thing is it's also been kind of an unspoken agreement that most plans with friends will have to wait, since we want to be as present as much as possible and help each other out. And it's just a hard time for all of us, even the baby, adjusting to new lifestyles. So I think it's important to prioritize this period and put hobbies and outings aside for the future.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us. My last question for you is, would you considering signing a prenatal or childbirth contract, despite you having said that many of these things are unspoken, would you want to put that into writing?
I didn't even know that contracts like this existed until I heard you guys talk about it today. But I thought about it, and if my partner had offered one, I'd be open to signing it. I just think it's a practical way to really prepare for the massive lifestyle changes that come with a new baby. And it would just be nice to have those important conversations and define what's expected from one another and how to handle the different roles and, other things like finances, responsibilities that could prevent arguments or misunderstandings to form later if those important talks hadn't been had. But since I'm assuming that these prenatal contracts are not legally binding and it's more of like a voluntary agreement between partners, I think it's also important to leave some room for adjustments and have some grace for one another, so that you can be flexible for unexpected situations and not be so business minded or business oriented, because it's family and it's not business. So that's my take on it.
Well, Grace, thank you so much for coming on today, and also you're genuinely glowing, and it's also so nice to see you back on the show, and hopefully we'll get to see you back in the studio as well.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
So we just heard from a new mother about her biggest concerns after childbirth, how she and her spouse divided responsibilities, and whether she'd consider a childbirth contract if given the choice again. Now let's shift gears and find out what our panelists stand on this with a quick balance game. So the first one would be, would you rather earn a high salary but demand pay for childbirth, or have no income and no plans to work after having a child? So Fabio, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, this one's tough to navigate, honestly.
It is.
I do think that anything that has to do with money and resources is always a source of tension, and I have seen that around me a lot with couples and friends and family. So for me, on a personal aspect, I would choose the first one, just because having already settled that agreement in terms of finances and being able to divide it in something that would feel fair for both would be the best for me. But
Right.
I see the second option also working.
See both sides. So what about you, Niall?
Yeah, I already feel like this question is pretty balanced in and of itself, because both options basically say that you know your strong suit, whether it be in finances and your career or childcare. And I say there's nothing wrong with someone who plans on being a full-time mother. And in fact, feminism is about empowerment of choices for women. So I respect that if we do choose the second option to stay at home. Just as much respect for any woman with a salary and great career. But I do want to question, if you are a woman with a very high salary and demanding financial compensation, genuinely, are you wanting the baby yourself? Or if you're being forced, that's a red flag right there. You need help. But if you're wanting the baby too, my question is, if we're being calculative and official, would you have to deduct the percentage of how much you want and your own willingness into the said payment that we mentioned?
So that shows how differently people weigh financial stability and also partnership. And now let's take it a step further and look at the bigger picture of family planning. So which situation would you prefer to be in? So struggle with infertility despite stable finances, or have multiple children but live on a tight single income?
Well, now that I'm getting older, I'm considering having children. I see it as a viable option. But at the same time, it's not necessarily a non-negotiable for me. When it comes to infertility, first of all, I do think that there's nowadays even more ways to start a family. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that a main struggle that I'm focusing on. But still, having kids would be nice, but still something that I'm a little bit ambiguous about. So for that reason, I would choose the economical stability, so that inside the relationship, we are able to live comfortably.
So as someone with a kid, actually, what are your thoughts on this?
You know what? I already am living the second option. But honestly, I choose the second option because I'm actively choosing that option. Mind you, I'm not procreating beyond my financial capabilities at the moment, but not being able to physically conceive is a very deeply hurting issue for many couples out there. And if you ask them, it's actually not such a simple answer whether they would choose a financial stability for both of them versus being physically able to have biological children. So the choice between the two are quite difficult. On the other hand, having a child and personally being able to choose the amount that I have to work and how much I make versus how much time I can spend with my child, I think we have somewhat of a control over that, which is a luxury and also something that I'm really grateful for. So again, option 2.
So both choices do come with real challenges and no real easy answers. It also brings up the question of personal priorities and also long-term fulfillment. So our last one is, would you rather quit your job to focus on raising a child, or stay child-free and fully pursue your career? Fabio?
I'm quitting. No, I do think both options, again, would be very nice. But if I'm able to comfortably devote myself to my children, I would do so. I know that I mentioned that it's still not a non-negotiable for me, that I'm still just considering having children. But if the situation comes, I feel like focusing on the process of education and their own activities would probably hold a lot more weight than my own personal career. But I can also see how people would go out of their way to continue their own journey so that they can also sustain their family. But in my case, if I'm comfortable enough, I'm probably quitting.
Fair enough. What about you, Nana?
As well, as long as there's financial backup. I guess I could quit my job and just focus on raising a child, or I could play the role of the breadwinner if it's necessary. I'm flexible to be whatever part in the family that I created that's necessary for that time being. And mind you, I love my career. I love doing what I do, but I wouldn't be happy without a family behind me. So no matter what opportunity is in my face right then, if it comes at the cost of having a healthy family, I would gladly let that go.
So there are some interesting perspectives that we just talked about, and it shows just how complex these decisions can be. But this isn't just a local conversation, it's also happening globally as well. So are there similar childbirth-related contracts we have in other nations?
Well, yes, in Western countries such as the United States and many parts of Europe, it's quite common to draw up prenuptial agreements, often shortened to prenups. And these agreements sometimes include clauses related to childbirth, and they are generally used as a way to protect the assets and the responsibilities of each party. We see this often in high-profile cases, for example, celebrities like Beyonce with Jay-Z, or Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, and so on. Well, often these are mentioned to have signed similar types of agreements, and even TV shows sometimes frequently depict prenups that include provisions for financial compensation to the wife upon childbirth. And additionally, in some parts of the Middle East, there is a custom called mahr. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And while it's not exactly the same as a formal legal contract, it does involve the exchange of property upon marriage. So in some cases, especially in royal and aristocratic families, in any culture pretty much, the husband would provide a lump sum of money to the wife when children are born. So we are seeing a lot of different strategies to handle the same problem.
Right, so this is one of the rare incidents where we can really see from both perspectives. So there are, I'm sure, a good amount of people who are really seriously considering this. So what should, for those who are considering this, what should couples keep in mind?
Yeah, if you are going to be writing a contract, then maybe you want it to be valid, right? Yes. But first of all, in Korea, contracts that directly tie physical and personal matters into, such as childbirth, into financial conditions are very likely to be considered invalid under civil law for violating public order. So if you do want to write it into a contract and make it legal, talk to a legal professional. But my take on this is that pregnancy and childbirth should fundamentally be based on love between the spouses rather than one side being forced into it. So attempting to reduce everything to monetary terms to get back in return, it may not be a very healthy option. But I do think there's good ways to do it, like community, friends, and family to really keep you in check for that.
Right, and at the end of the day, whether you see marriage contracts as practical or pessimistic may come down to how you define trust in a relationship. For some, it's about putting faith in each other, while for others, it's about putting things in writing to avoid uncertainty. And either way, the growing debate shows that love and partnership are being redefined in a very real and modern way. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation, but News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Fabio.
Thank you for having me.
And also Niall.
No problem.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully the only thing you'll feel like you have to sign is a receipt and not a relationship contract. We are
News Generation.
Arirang TV, I want to say you a happy anniversary now that you are celebrating 30 years of activity. 30 years ago, we were in 1996, which meant the beginning of the internet for the general population itself. And now here we are, 30 years later, and we're at the dawn of the artificial